Hello and welcome to Undermine Season 4, Episode 17. I'm Tom Marshall, your Phish tour guide, as we continue to make some select stops along the Phish 1.0 history journey. Yes, the time known as the 1990s. And we're counting down or up, depending on your view, to the famous fall 1997 Phish tour that some people call their best tour ever. In the meantime, you can catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Until we get to the predictable and well-documented path of fall 97, we'll keep tweeting the show dates for our next episode in advance so that you can beat the spoilers and listen for yourself before you hear us talk about it. Or you can just use your imagination. But these jams sound best coming straight from the source. So follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and we'll keep you one lesson plan ahead of the class. If you're watching us today on YouTube, you can see for yourself that my co-host for today is fellow Undermine executive producer and New York Times bestselling author, Benji Eisen. Hi, Benji.
Hi, Tom. Today we are, well, yes, the people watching on YouTube will know that I'm about to lie, but I was going to say we're putting on our Phish issue lab coats, and we're going to sneak into the Gamehendge Time Laboratory because we're going back to New Year's Eve, 1995, where, curiously, it's 1994 forever. Actually, Tom, this is actually incredible because there's a question that I really have been waiting to ask you for about 27 years now. And I think it's going to have to wait just a little bit longer, maybe during the commercial break or right before or after or something. In the meantime, we are revisiting Madison Square Garden on 12/31/1995, which is, of course, a date that any longtime Phish fan will be quite familiar with already. In fact, I think the number combination 12/31/94 is, 12/31/95. See, Trey has me all tripped up on it. Is considered sacred scripture in Phish lore. So I think we'll get to that in a moment. But before we do anything that we're about to do, before we do anything else, before you let me say one more needless word, let me chant the incantation that will unlock everything that follows. And that is, if you've been enjoying this season of Undermine, then please consider subscribing to Cyrus Premium on Apple, where you will get ad-free podcasts, bonus episodes, and more. Okay, Tom, it is time to page our guest from the waiting room.
I will. And I'm glad that you always have a cheerful way of saying that thing that we have to say. And I don't know if people know how dire it is that we say it. Benji and I could be arrested if we don't. So he always is cheerful about it. And we look like we're not under duress, but we are. But anyway, Benji, this man, our guest, does need an introduction, even though it's true that our listeners may already be well familiar with Drew Hitz from past Undermine seasons. But if you were paying attention, you could tell us all about him on our pop quiz. If there was a pop quiz, if there was, Drew would ace it because he's an aficionado when it comes to all things Phish. And he also brings something unique to the table because Drew's day job includes touring around the world as a working tuba player. In fact, in the Phish community, he might be our scene's first tubist. So give a warm, overhanded Undermine welcome to Drew Hitz as he comes in from the waiting room. There he is. Hi, Drew.
What's up, guys?
I was going to say welcome, but I'm really saying welcome back. But this is the first time on season 4 of Undermine, but you've been on many seasons and you've contributed, and thank you and welcome back.
Well, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Benji and I were just talking a little bit, prepping for, what to ask you and what to talk to you about. And he even remembers what section he was in at MSG for this show.
108.
And I was in the building that night too. And all three of us were. And I remember exactly where I was. And I was on the floor for most of it because back then they had floor seats. And as soon as those floor seats left, I also left the floor. I like the rigid containers preventing, a lot of the kind of malarkey that occurs on the floor these days. But anyway, Drew, we're going to talk about the show, but please first tell us about your experience. Where were you? Who was with you? What was it like going into the heart of New York City on that New Year's Eve to see Phish play their very first Madison Square Garden New Year's Eve show?
So I remember exactly where I was because it was by far, considering the weight of the show, was the best seats that I have ever had. I was in section 2, 15th row, dead center.
Wow.
Yeah. So which are just absolutely perfect. So, and I was with my friend Saul Wertheimer, who's used to be a big Fishnet contributor back in the day. He is now a rabbi living in Queens, but he got those through Phish mail order, and I think he offered me the extra. I might have threatened him, but either way, I ended up with the extra ticket. And I do remember that I stayed with a couple of friends who were students at Manhattan School in a tiny apartment up at 125th and Broadway, and I slept on the floor. There was barely enough floor in this apartment for me to sleep on. That's how small it was. And interestingly, now one of them is the principal percussionist of the Cleveland Orchestra. He's like one of the most famous percussionists in the world. But he was not famous at the time. Yeah, he was just my knucklehead friend living in a very small place who I crashed with. But that was a magical evening. Nice.
Way up, so far Upper West Side that if your feet had gone any further up, that you'd be out of New York.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, well, it's still, you still got Washington Heights. You still got a few, there's still a few neighborhoods up there.
Inwood and some other stuff. You're right.
Yep. But it's pretty up there.
Drew, not to get ahead of ourselves, but, for a long time, this show that we're talking about, 12/31/95, it was considered by many to be the penultimate night of Phish. And it was consistently voted their best show of all time at the time. Before we start in with our mostly agreeable opinions, I think, can you give us some context? Did you catch any of the fall 95 shows that led up to this? Were you paying attention to set lists? I guess at the time, the set list would roll in through Rec Music Phish and, the early version of Phish Internet.
Yes. So they played 17 shows in December 95, and I caught 11 of the 17, which was good timing considering, the output that month. I actually successfully I now teach college, so don't do this, kids. But I actually successfully moved 2 of my finals up, and I don't remember what the reason I gave, but it was not so that I could see my 10th and 11th Phish shows of the month. It was something more creative than that. So I was watching all of the set lists in real time for the 6 that I didn't catch that month, in addition to the 11 I did. And I also saw a number, maybe 7 in October, including the famous Lincoln 10/21/95 and Madison 10/24 and Halloween as well, which was right down the street since I was at Northwestern. So yeah, I saw quite a bit of that fall tour and was following all of it rabidly. I knew in the moment that something special was happening. We all did.
That's amazing. I wonder how many people have that same experience, because I did finals between going to those shows. I went to Hershey and back. I went to UMass and back. Mm-hmm. I think by Binghamton, that was my final was I did my last final, and I headed off to Binghamton.
Wow. Neither Benji nor I have amounted to anything, though, kids. So don't do that.
Finals over Phish. Finals then Phish. Remember that mantra. All right. So you take your seats. Let's talk about the music. The lights go down. Band plays the first set. What are your takeaways? Set 1.
So set 1, first of all, the punch you in the eye, you can hear right away. I adore that song all the time, but there are a few openers where you can tell, and it's usually Trey, where there's just like a little something, a little extra spicy
extra energy.
Yeah, I was just listening to 11/28/98, the Wipeout show the other day, and the Buried Alive that opens the second set. You can hear that before the melody even comes in, that Trey's doing this very creative, like kind of rhythmic comping, and it's extended by Trey. It's only like 20, 25 seconds, but you could tell that night it was like, oh, and sure enough, like, it was like, magic for the next 70 straight minutes. And this punch has some of that as well. Incredibly tight. The Reba is one of the greatest Rebas that's ever been played, like bar none. The Squirming Coil is the outro jam. Might be my favorite outro from a Squirming Coil that's ever been played, and that's because there's this incredibly intricate interplay between Page and Trey. And it's normal where the band will kind of fade out and then Page does his thing. Well, the band fades out, and I didn't re-listen to this, but I think Trey might either he keeps going after, long after Mike and Fishman stop, or he kind of comes back in, but it kind of then bubbles back up, but it's just the two of them. And it's gorgeous. It's almost like they're both taking the lead in spots. And then Trey eventually backs away. And then, a perfectly executed Forbin Mockingbird where there was some tall dude, I wasn't sure who it was, who got up there in the middle of that. And, and like even that gag with, like with Shine was just like, it was like totally surreal because the band, you all like nailed it. I mean, like the singing and everything, which made it even funnier. Like Phish gags are either like horrifically bad or they're really, really, this one was perfectly executed, which made it more ridiculous. And then a strong chalk dust to close, but all time versions of Reba and of Squirming Coil. And this was by far the worst of the three sets. And it was an amazing opening set.
All time version of Shine too by Collective Soul.
Yes. That was easily the best I've ever seen.
that hits. You both kind of hit upon Drew while you were in the waiting room. I mentioned to Tom that there was a question that I've had for him.
No.
On wait for like 27 years.
Oh no! I hope I can answer it.
It's that during this narration, Trey explains that the band spends their downtime off the road in the Gamehendge Time Laboratory so that they can make sure the time keeps moving forward, or else we'll be in 1994 forever. But it was already the last few moments of 1995. So, Tom, do you think Trey forgot the year? Or was he referencing the song itself, Shine, was from 1994. So was he referencing that perhaps? I thought he lost track of time.
No. I think it's what you said. I think it was like, he was just sort of like saying an example. Like, imagine if we got stuck in 94 when this song was the obnoxious song on the radio. But you're right. Maybe we should have found one from 95 just to make more sense. But I do think that I think this song was kind of chosen on the bus and the band, and like everyone agreed that it's like the one that's in your head that everyone will know that's like been ridiculously overplayed.
My goodness, yes. Yeah, it was everywhere.
And you can't help but just like Oasis or Third Eye Blind, you can't help but to like the song, right? It's pretty catchy, but no one is allowed to admit that they like it, which is why it made it better. But all right, back to real time. Benji, I'm glad I was able to answer that, I think. That night, after the first set, the band audience chess match. So the saga comes to a close suspiciously with a 1-1 draw. Drew, can you talk us through the second set highlight reel?
Absolutely. I was very happy when it ended up 1-1 because I was heavily vested, and I didn't go and actually play, but I was, because I had seen, I think 18 shows that tour. So I had seen a lot of moves, and I'm trying to think of where it was. There was one move in October that was so bad for the audience that the guy got booed, and the band made him do it over again because it was like sacrificing our queen for no reason because he was just on a little too much of something he shouldn't have been on, making our chess move. But anyway, so the easily the greatest round ever played, a perfectly executed Lizards. The Runaway Jim is really incredible. It's melodic, it's driving, it's and then there's kind of like the December 95 perma funk, which then that kicks in before it builds. And then, Strange Design, Hello, My Baby was kind of like an interesting, two down tunes in a row. And then probably the most confused I've ever been as a Phish nerd during a set was when they dropped into Mike Song. And I'm like, looking at my watch and I'm like, there is not time to do. And I was like, are they just going to just jam a Mike's Hydrogen Weekapog that's going to be 13 total minutes here? That just didn't seem like it was really what was going to happen. And then sure enough, one of the greatest, some people call it the greatest Mike song ever played. It's in the conversation. But even how they, I won't jump into the third set yet, but even how they constructed this, where there was this Mike song within the digital delay loop jam, which was just Trey with the rest of them leaving as if it was a Coil encore, which they did in the middle of the first set, which is unusual placement for this time of, this point in their history. And then they threw a set break in the middle of Mike's groove, which was just, so even the set list construction was a little off kilter in a really creative way.
In a good way.
That Mike song is just it's phenomenal. Oh my goodness, it's phenomenal. The first jam is short, but incredibly. It sounds like at this point, this band, there's so many of their jams sounded like completely planned, written out, and rehearsed for months, and yet at the same time spontaneous, if that makes any sense. I mean, it was just polished. They were finishing each other's sentences at a level that I had never seen before. And I saw some pretty amazing Phish in 93 and 94. And this Mike song. And then the second jam, they kick in, and then almost instantly it completely just, it comes together as this completely different groove and vibe almost instantly. Again, as if it was something that had been pre-played. It was almost like they went into a different song, and it was still Mike's song within the structure. But they were just, like I just said, finishing each other's sentences, just really operating at a level where it had to be a whole lot of fun being one of those four musicians getting on stage, at that point of that tour.
There was a lot of mind reading that night, and what blew my mind was that they're not just reading one other person's mind; they're reading each other's mind, the group mind, as it were. And now since Phish, of course, right now currently isn't on the road, I think that means that Trey, Mike, Page, and Phish are all back in the Gamehendge Time Laboratory. They're making sure that time moves forward, and it does, because it's already time for us to cut to a short commercial break. But we'll be right back.
Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if your investments reflected what matters most to you? At Green Future Wealth Management, the advisors specialize in helping clients manifest their values in their financial lives. Green Future Wealth Management was founded by certified financial planner practitioner and longtime fan Nick Cantrell, named by Forbes as one of the top next-gen wealth advisors in the country. Whether you are just getting started or have complex investing and financial planning needs, visit them on the web at greenfuturewealth.com. You can sign up for the email list or take the Investing Values quiz. When you feel ready, schedule a free virtual consultation. In appreciation for the amazing Phish community and the incredible work being done by fans across the country, Green Future Wealth Management will be donating 10% of asset management proceeds from new Osiris listener clients to Fans for Racial Equity. Just be sure to mention Osiris when booking your appointment. Create your green future. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc. Cambridge and Green Future Wealth are not affiliated.
And we are back. Fishman may or may not have gotten a haircut during that break. Speaking of, Drew, do you remember watching Fishman get a haircut on stage during set break? For those of us who weren't there, do you want to explain?
It was a very Phish moment. Yeah, it happened right in front of me, where it was like, what the hell is is that Fishman on stage? Why is he, and then he's and then he sat and then he got a haircut. Yeah. This is a true sign of Phish and their creativity, and Fishman in particular, where it was kind of like, this is crazy. What is it? And it's of course Fishman is sitting on stage at Madison Square Garden with the lights up getting a haircut, because why wouldn't he?
I was thinking he's it was an excuse that he had to go and tell his mom something you went to New York and didn't get a haircut. So he made sure that he got a haircut in New York.
That was a little surreal.
I think I looked up and I just looked at at the girl I was with at the time, and I said, I think he lost the bet. But okay, so the second set ends with mites, which in itself, as you alluded to earlier, Drew, was completely unheard of at the time. I know that they did the Mites Wikipod in Boston for New Year's Eve in '92, where they had Old Lang Syne in the middle, but that wasn't ending the set and then coming back. So we knew what that meant. We knew that Wikipod would be the New Year's song. But give us the third set takeaway, because obviously Wikipod must lead in that race.
Yeah, the first one, this is real nerdy musically, but the Auld Lang Syne is actually something that I have played for classical students of mine, specifically Trey's, his embellishment of that melody is very like Paul McCartney-esque, which for me is like an enormous compliment, where you listen to Paul McCartney sing Hey Jude, and he does not add a single extra note to that melody until it's like maybe the third time through, and then he adds like one extra note, or maybe it's two extra notes, and he sticks. And then so when he actually does embellish a lot, you wait for it and like the payoff. Whereas I once saw a national anthem at a Wizards game here in DC, and the person sang so many notes on say, they had to breathe after the word say, which that is a bad sign. So this is like the exact opposite of that, which it's just like, it's perfection with like all the New Year's craziness going on. And then that drops into what is by far my favorite Wikipog of all time. I think that might be the jam that I've listened to the most times of any Phish jam ever played.
Whoa, wow.
I've listened to it hundreds of times. And I love the Mike song, but I've listened to the Wikipog for whatever reason, like 2 times as many times as the Mikes, if I don't have time for the whole thing. The Wikipog is just, it's really, really, it's incredible. It's driving, it's festive, it's melodic. There's a lot of rhythmic interplay. There's one quarter note triplet lick that Trey sets up, and he plays a lick and then waits, and then plays the lick and then waits, and then plays it, extends it, and both Fishman and Mike join him like to a perfect release, and it was which made me fist pump because I'm a weirdo. There's just a really this is Phish at their absolute best. Any musicians at their absolute best, but this is a perfect example of it, is that all 4 of them during this Wikipog, during this entire month of December 95, they all came to every tune with very, very strong opinions about the direction a jam wanted to go, where they wanted to take things, but simultaneously are willing and able at any moment to take information from any of the other 3 and change their own course. And that's when it's the most exciting time I'm imagining if you're writing songs with people, it's the same way, where if you're writing a song with somebody who has strong ideas that they're willing to completely, go the other way with when you have a strong idea that influences them or whatever. It's the same thing with either improv or composed music. And Phish was just like reeking of exclamation points, but also of, wanting to be able to, of playing off of one another. It was like 4 leaders on stage, but in an organic way. And
lots of yes and, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the old improv trick. That's exactly right, Tom. Yes and. See, I just yes-anded your yes and. That was really meta right there. And then Sea and Sand was the first time that had been played since Halloween, and that was like, they turned Madison Square Garden. It reminded me of Trey's I'm One at on Halloween, which was just solo with him and acoustic. Where like Page, it's not easy to turn an arena like that into what felt like a coffee house for a few minutes, but it was very intimate. And then that was followed by one of the best You Enjoy Myselfs ever played, which these are not things I throw around either, right? Like my top 10 list of yems is not 35 yems long, and my top 5 list of Wikipogs is not 20 Wikipogs. But it's all, but it's all, all of the fall 95, but especially like Halloween 95, this one, and of course Albany with the Silent Jam, which I was lucky enough to be at as well. Just inspired, just really, really, really inspired. And then Frankenstein, Johnny Be Good to close was just like, just frantic rock and roll, just, it's like basically just mic drop and then, storm off stage and I'm guessing high five and hug each other. So yeah, that was, it was just a remarkable night that holds up in every possible way on tape.
And hearing you talk about your breakdowns per set, I'm trying to come away with the answer. And I think you've either over answered or haven't quite answered. Like, what is it that makes the show so legendary? Was it one set in particular, or was it that everyone in the room remembered the energy of being in New York City on New Year's Eve? Or was it one of those top to bottom, just incredible shows? You just need to take the whole thing in to appreciate the fullness of it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say that the first New Year's at Madison Square Garden certainly played into the vibe in the moment, and the crowd was really great. I've never been like with a bad Phish crowd, but there are some where, and anyone who's performed a lot has experienced this, where there are some nights, and you still give it just as much for any crowd, doesn't matter what, but there are some crowds that make it unbelievably easy to collect a check that night, because it's just like the energy is just like screaming at you from them. And this was one of those. But I would say it's not only the flow of the whole thing, and also all the tunes that didn't make the list. Like the Maze is unbelievably well performed. The Sloth is perfectly executed. The Axilla is very tight. It's like all of it is really, really. But I think that it's like all-time versions of Reba, Drowned, Runaway Jim, Mike's song, Weekapaug, You Enjoy Myself. I mean, it's like 6 tunes that are all, if you had 3 of those and then the other 3 were just good 95 versions, this would still be revered as one of the best shows ever. But that's like 6 massive jam vehicles that are all-time versions, which you add that all up and it's, considered one of the greatest of all time with reason.
There are some shows that make greatest, that make best of lists based off of one version of one song, and as you said, this is completely stacked. Now, I was once on board. It's hard for me to name, when people say, what's your favorite show? It's like, I break down subcategories. What's my favorite show that I was at versus what's my favorite show versus, all these things. At the time, I definitely was on board with putting this on a top 5. Maybe not the top, only because there was such stiff competition leading up to it with the 5, 6, 7 weeks, that led up in the November and December of 95. And then also what I think we need to keep in mind is that, the 2/20/93 Roxy show, 6/22/94 Columbus, these were all recent shows at the time. And yet this definitely topped it. But now that we have all these years and hundreds of shows later, totally different chapters of Phish, do you think that New Year's Eve 95 is still the high watermark?
I always off the top give Big Cypress an NR for not rated or not rateable, just because that was just such a colossal. And I think that you could absolutely articulate on musical grounds only why you would favor this show over Big Cypress. I'm not making that argument, but Big Cypress is just is its own thing. And, they built a city in the Everglades and then, played for 7.5 straight hours. So not considering Big Cypress, I think that this is one of those where, it's similar to the Cornell Dead show, where there are, some hipsters who like to say that Buffalo is better, which Buffalo's an amazing Dead show. But when you actually just you ignore all the hype and then you just look at the all-time versions of Dancing in the Streets and of the Walk Off Do and you just add it all up and you go wait a minute, sometimes the hype is justified when you just kind of look at it on paper. And I think that this is the perfect example of that. And you're right, but it also depends on what you're looking for in a show. And then there's a lot of nuance, like nobody, the Albany 12/9/95, the first set of Albany was not one of the stronger sets in December 95. And it wasn't bad, but like, again, there's not 30 Yems in my top 10. So like that first set of Albany is in like the bottom 50% easily of sets in December 95.
Well,
Nobody was walking out of Albany going, yeah, the first set wasn't that strong. I mean, the Yem was I'm getting goosebumps literally right now. I mean, thinking about it, it was so just transcendental that all anybody talked about leaving was the You Enjoy Myself. I mean, there were people high-fiving, and it had been like 40 minutes since that thing had ended, and people were high-fiving, yelling about the You Enjoy Myself. So it's all kind of, it's like the tentpole jam and a show versus, but this has got like 7 tent poles, and it has, there's like 7 jams you could build the show around, but also all of the type 1 stuff is perfectly executed. And then and even the gag was great. I mean, like with the Fishman and a typer. I mean, it's like, it was all just, I thought that it had absolutely everything, and it was tight while also the band was obviously creatively loose. And I could see it's truly remarkable in retrospect that the band was so loose. And so now they got the first show ever, MSG 94, 12/30/94, which I was at as well, which was a good show. But like that was nothing compared to the Bowie the night before in Providence, which was one of my all time favorite moments. But like they felt the weight of MSG and they delivered. So like some really, really good stuff. But like, the first ever New Year's, like right down the street from where the ball drops, like the center of the universe. Yeah. And they were, talk about a justifiably being nervous potentially. And they walked on stage just like the 4 dudes who look like us. I know Tom, basically you are one of the dudes, but you know what I mean, right? It's just like
they all in the room. Yeah.
Yeah. 10 years older than me at the time, but they look just like I would, like, no thought in what they were wearing. They just walked out and then they just like punched everybody in the nose and smiled and
in the eye.
In the eye. Thank you, Tom. That was right there waiting for me and I missed it. So yeah. So I think it holds up to any scrutiny personally.
Nice. Well, as you know, Drew, so we're counting our way. Basically, our destination is fall 97, and we had to hit this show. We knew that we were going to do 25 shows leading up to fall 97. This one was one that even I, who don't go back and listen to a lot of shows, knew had to be, on our program this season. It's a legendary show, but it's also a must-stop waypoint in a way on our way to fall 97. And so now that destination is just 2 years away from this point. How does Phish in 97 evolve from Phish at this point?
Boy, that's a hard one to answer quickly. But the band just never stops growing still, but especially then it was like every single tour sounded in some way different significantly than it had previously. Even like summer, this isn't what you asked, but summer 95 was like this, it sounded like the love child of fall 94, which got really dark and which I absolutely adore. And then like fall 95, especially like from, like mid-October on, that we kind of know as fall 95 in all caps. It was like, it sounds like those two got together and then made that. And sure enough, so it's like you can see.
Spaced out. And
yes.
they spaced out.
Yes. It's just like there's a through line right through, all of those things. And 96, there was some really special moments in 96. However, it did feel like things didn't quite click at any point over an extended period of time like they did in December 95. But that's because like when you take all growth in music and just in life comes from when you don't quite know when something is going to work out or not. Right, where you decide to start Osiris Media, and it's like if there was a pamphlet to tell you do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then it succeeds, then thousands of people would have done it before you, and nobody would have heard of it. It would have lasted a month, right? So you don't know if it's going to be a huge flop, a huge success, somewhere in the middle, and it's the same thing musically. And now I want to be clear, I'm not calling 96 Phish like a flop. I mean, at all. I mean, there's some like really, I mean, the Clifford Ball, again, talk about stepping up, like that festival that they, like they're rewriting like the rock industry, like in real time. They're learning how to fly the plane while it's in the air. And some of that Down with Disease, like the Brother, when they've got Ben and Jerry on stage and then they just like destroy that song. I mean, that's like, but 96 felt a little bit disjointed, whereas everything from mid-October on, like really felt like it was clicking. And then 97, things like kind of started to morph again in a really, really special way. And there are a lot of parallels musically between 95 and 97, which I don't have time to like get into deeply, but there's also a lot of differences. They're both patient, but patient in different ways. And I think that the band got even more patient in 97. But that's not a slight to 95. I think part of the magic of 95 is in some spots was a lack of patience. And the Albany Yem, I mean, there's like, you could obviously point to like dozens of examples to make what I just said, out of context seem ridiculous. But they were kind of like always looking for where that thing was going. And in 97, I think that they sometimes knew where things were going. They just didn't know how they were getting there. And they were very comfortable with that and comfortable with letting it get there however it was going to get there, sometimes with nuance and sometimes not. But these are, it's all magical time in Phish history. And I'm very happy that I was just old enough to be able to do it and not old enough to have any kind of real responsibilities of any kind at all. So Mom and Dad, thank you for having me in 1975. I can never repay you.
Drew, I know that we are about to run out of time, so just very quickly here, let me ask you a question that you could probably spend 3 hours answering.
Sure.
Good, a nice fast one, perfect.
Yeah, but in a nutshell, we just jumped ahead to 97 because obviously that's what this season of Undermine is doing. Mm-hmm. But I feel like since we have been going chronologically, let's just turn it around for a second and look back. New Year's Eve gigs often to me are the culmination of the year. And as you said, Phish, especially during this period, every tour, they were a remarkably different band. They had every tour had this character, this hallmark fingerprint to it. Mm-hmm. So for New Year's Eve 95, can you just quickly talk about like how it might have been the punctuation mark on, I was going to say the 2 years from New Year's 93 to 95, but let's just talk about 95. How was the New Year's show kind of a culmination of everything they had been working towards at that point?
So the summer 95 was very, very exploratory. That might be my favorite tour ever. They went like really deep and they had absolutely no idea where they were going on those jams. I was lucky enough to be at Mud Island for that legendary tweezer. And I was pissed when they ripcorded it after 51 minutes. So yeah, I wanted that thing to go on for another half an hour. But that style of jamming, I would have been happy if they had never deviated from that ever. If they had been doing that for the last 27 years, I would be leaving every show, like doing fist pumps and high fiving. But that's not Phish. It's like they're constantly morphing. And so the fall, they then kind of reined it in. Although I doubt that and maybe they did, but I wouldn't guess that they called it that or that they thought of that as the mission. But they kind of reined it in a little bit more, and there was a lot less like mixed meter. A lot of those jams. There's like the SPAC 95, like the free, that Down with Disease free, like that free is just like is amazing. And all of a sudden it goes into this like demented waltz, like in 3. I mean, it's just like that kind of stuff didn't happen in fall 95 or actually much in many periods since. But they kind of started to rein it in. And then by the end of that tour, and there's always a correlation in Phish history between long tours and the end of them really finishing each other's sentences. And those shows started, at the end of September, not the strongest start to a tour, to say the least, but like the end of September out in California. And then with the exception of a 1 week break, they went all the way through December 17th, at Lake Placid. But they kind of perfected that new style. And that's the thing. When every tour is different, the four of them are each different. And then the combined conversation is different. That when they get that long to really figure out the real nuance in the conversation that they're having, I think that's what we got towards the end. And then if New Year's, I'll close with this. If New Year's 95 had just ended up being a solid show and not legendary, I still think that December 95 would be in the top, 3 months conversation that they've ever played. And if the New Year's run had just been like the tweezer from the 28th and the Bathtub Gin, Real Me Bathtub Gin, which lifted me off of the floor when they segued into that. And then like the 30th and 31st were fine. It still would have been an amazing New Year's. But the fact that they put this much of an exclamation point musically, artistically, performance art wise, even though with the gag and with Tom's with Shine, I mean, it's just like even the gags were perfectly executed. I mean, it was just one of those nights where Michael Jordan used to talk about at the end of basketball games that things would slow down, right? When he could kind of just he could see where teammates were headed or where defenders were going to be at the end of it. And it just felt like Phish was in this moment. And I have experienced that whole flow state on stage where everything just goes slower and it just feels like you can just make the art and that everything else gets pushed away, including even the operating of the instrument. But when all four people on stage are experiencing that at one time, then that's when, if you're in the building, you'll be telling your kids about it and talking about it on a podcast, however many years later.
That's when a show like this happens. And
exactly.
And Drew, we really do have to sound the end of time horn here, or the end of time tuba in this case. But it's such a delight to hear. At Osiris, we found a bunch of people like you with certain levels of knowledge, but your effortless way of describing it and your impeccable memory, but also coupled with your musical ability to analyze, makes you like one of our best guests by far when we're talking at this level of detail. And thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and thank you for joining us. And as always, also to my co-host, Benji Eisen, and our fellow executive producers, RJB and Matt Dwyer. And thank you to everyone out there in podcast land for joining us. And if you like us, come back for more and remember to review and subscribe wherever you listen or watch. And we'll see you in a few days, which in our world will mean a new year, 1996. And it's not the same as you remember it. We promise you. Even though, yes, Bob Dole was the Republican presidential candidate, it was a strange year. But if you really want to go back with us, cue up August 16th and 17th, 1996. What is that date, Benji? What are those dates?
Well, that is when we become beacons of light in a world of slight.
Exactly.
And if I could super quickly step on the script, and if I could just plug the Mockingbird Foundation, which I'm on the board of directors of, I just a heartfelt thank you to everybody in the Phish community who has donated money or time or whatever. We recently passed $2 million handed out to schools around the country, and none of that is possible without all of you. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you very much.
A heartfelt thank you from the Phish community back to the Mockingbird, because you guys are just doing such a wonderful thing for our community.
Amen.
There it is.
Thank
We'll
you.
end there. Thank you, guys.
Osiris.